Imagine for a second that you are just dropped onto a completely hostile alien planet.
Oh man, that's the ultimate nightmare scenario right there.
Right. It really is. Your transport ship is, well, it's utterly destroyed. The captain who brought you there is dead. Your commanding officers had just been assassinated in a trap.
Yeah.
And you're stranded 1,500 miles from anything you could even call home, completely surrounded by, millions of local inhabitants who want nothing more than to just absolutely wipe you off the face of the map.
And let's not forget the winter snows are starting to fall too.
Exactly. The snow is falling. You have
Yeah.
no supply lines, no communication with the outside world. And the people who brought you here in the first place, they completely lied to you about the destination. So how does your community avoid just immediately collapsing into panic? How do you even take the next step, let alone survive?
I mean, it sounds like the premise for, I don't know, a high concept sci-fi survival thriller, but it's actually one of the most astonishing, meticulously documented historical realities of the ancient world. The psychological pressure of that exact situation is it's almost unfathomable.
It really is. And, we are talking about Xenophon's Anabasis,
Hmm.
which is the text that's often translated as the March Up Country or the Expedition of Cyrus. It's this stunning military memoir from around 370 BCE, chronicling the fate of 10,000 Greek mercenaries who found themselves in that precise, impossible situation deep inside the Persian Empire.
Yeah, but if you think we're just doing a dry, dusty history lesson today, think again.
Definitely not. Our mission in this deep dive is to take this 2,400-year-old tale of stranded, desperate soldiers and use it as a really profound, real-world mirror for the Christian journey.
Absolutely.
We have a massive stack of incredible sources to unpack today. Xenophon's own firsthand accounts, modern historical and psychological analyses, and some really deep theological critiques.
Because the contrast here between human courage, the absolute limits of human virtue, and the radical, incomparable nature of God's grace, it is completely breathtaking.
Yeah, we really want to explore how this ancient survival story can actually, deepen your faith, inspire you to love Christ more deeply, and equip you to live for him more fully in your daily life.
Right. And to do this justice, we are going to be examining this historical epic through a really specific lens, biblical theology. We'll be placing the Anabasis side by side with the exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt, the wilderness poetry of the Psalms, and, the penetrating teachings of the New Testament.
Which is such a fascinating collision.
It really is. When you put Xenophon next to the Apostle Paul or next to Moses, the philosophical collisions are just electric. It clarifies what it truly means for you to walk through your own wilderness seasons today.
But, okay, before we can get to the spiritual metaphors and those theological lessons, we absolutely have to establish the sheer crushing hopelessness of the historical reality these soldiers faced.
We have to set the board, yeah.
Right. Because the track that gets sprung on them is, well, it's legendary in military history. So let's set the board. The year is 401 BCE. How on earth do 10,000 elite Greek warriors end up stranded in the dead center of the Persian Empire?
Well, it begins with a massive royal deception that preys upon a very specific geopolitical situation at the time. The Persian Empire is the absolute superpower of the day. We are talking about a territory stretching from modern-day Turkey all the way to the borders of India.
Massive. Just
Right.
unimaginably huge.
Exactly. And the previous king, Darius II, has died, and his eldest son, Artaxerxes II, has taken the throne in Babylon. But there is a younger brother, Cyrus, known to history as Cyrus the Younger, and Cyrus believes with just absolute conviction the throne should actually be his.
Classic royal family drama.
Oh, completely. So Cyrus is a satrap, which is essentially a powerful regional governor operating out of Asia Minor, and he starts secretly, very quietly, recruiting a massive shadow army to usurp his brother.
And to usurp the king of kings, Cyrus knows he needs the absolute best infantry in the world.
Right, and who is that at this time?
It's the Greeks. At this specific moment in history, right after the end of the devastating Peloponnesian War, the undisputed masters of infantry combat are the Greeks. You kind of have to understand the mechanics of Greek warfare at this time to see why Cyrus wanted them so badly.
Yeah, explain the hoplites for us.
So these are hoplites. They fight in a deeply packed, highly disciplined formation called a phalanx. They carry this massive, bowl-shaped wooden shield covered in bronze called an aspis, which, covers them from chin to knee.
Almost like a walking wall.
Exactly like a walking wall.
Yeah.
And they carry an 8-foot spear with an iron tip and a bronze counterweight.
Mhm.
When these guys lock their shields together and push forward in what they called the ophismos, the great shove, They're basically an ancient armored tank.
Yeah, and the Persians, they had vast numbers of lightly armed troops, right? And incredible cavalry, but they just did not have heavy infantry that could stand toe-to-toe with a Greek phalanx.
They really didn't. So that mechanical superiority is exactly what Cyrus is banking on. Plus, because the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta has just ended, Greece is completely flooded with thousands of battle-hardened veterans who basically know no other trade but war and who are suddenly unemployed.
It is a total buyer's market for mercenaries.
Yeah.
So Cyrus starts quietly hiring them through proxies. He recruits roughly 13,000 of these heavy infantrymen, alongside some peltasts, which are lighter skirmish troops. But, and here's the kicker, he completely lies to them about the mission.
Ultimate bait and switch.
Right. He tells them they are just going on a brief, localized, punitive campaign to subdue a rebellious mountain tribe called the Pisidians. He completely conceals the fact that he actually intends to march them hundreds and hundreds of miles east, deep into the hostile heart of the empire, to overthrow his own brother.
And the logistics of this deception are just staggering. I mean, the Greek soldiers march out of Sardis in western Turkey, expecting a short trip, but they just keep walking. Day after day, week after week, they're dragging supply trains, armor, camp followers.
And eventually it becomes obvious, right?
Yeah, by the time they hit the Euphrates River, the geographical reality is undeniable. They're clearly not fighting a local mountain tribe in Asia Minor. They are marching on Babylon. But by then, they are just way too far in.
They're trapped.
Completely. They are entirely reliant on Cyrus for their pay, their rations, and their protection. They are mathematically trapped by distance. So they keep going until they finally meet the massive royal army of King Artaxerxes at the Battle of Cunaxa.
And this battle is where the tragic irony of the whole expedition just crystallizes. The Greeks are positioned on the right wing of Cyrus's battle line, resting their flank against the Euphrates River. When the battle begins, the Greeks perform exactly as Cyrus hoped they would. Their discipline is terrifying.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Yeah, as they advance, they start to sing their battle hymn, the Pan, and they actually break into a run. The psychological impact of thousands of heavily armored men screaming and charging in perfect unison, it completely breaks the Persian left wing. The forces opposite the Greeks rout almost immediately.
Wow.
The Greeks pursue them off the battlefield, essentially winning their side of the war without taking any significant casualties.
So it's a total tactical victory for the mercenaries.
Absolutely. But while the Greeks are chasing down the routing Persians, disaster strikes in the center of the line. Cyrus catches sight of his brother Artaxerxes surrounded by his royal bodyguard. And in a moment of just pure, reckless fury, Cyrus completely abandons all discipline.
Oh, no.
He charges directly at the king with just a small cavalry detachment. He actually manages to break through and wound Artaxerxes through his breastplate, but in the chaotic melee, Cyrus is struck beneath the eye by a javelin and killed instantly.
Man, it is such a devastating twist of fate. The Greeks returned to their camp that evening thinking, we won. The battle is ours. Only to find out the next morning that the man who hired them, the man whose claim to the throne they were fighting for, the man who was supposed to pay them and lead them back home, is lying dead in the dust.
The political objective of the entire war evaporated the second that javelin struck Cyrus. Artaxerxes is still the undisputed king. And these 10,000 Greeks are completely, utterly stranded.
They are 1,500 miles from the Aegean Sea, surrounded by a hostile empire that stretches for thousands of miles in every direction. And somehow the situation is about to get unimaginably worse.
Because the Persians realize they have a massive geopolitical headache on their hands.
Exactly. They have 10,000 heavily armed, highly disciplined Greek killing machines sitting in the absolute dead center of their empire. And the Persians do not want to fight them in a pitched battle, because the Greeks have already proven at Cunaxa that their phalanx will absolutely shred Persian infantry.
Right, they want them gone, but they don't want to bleed to make it happen. So the Persian commander, this cunning strategist named Tissaphernes, resorts to treachery. He initiates the decapitation of the Greek leadership.
And Tissaphernes plays a brilliant, completely ruthless psychological game here. He approaches the Greek generals and offers to negotiate a truce. He promises to guide them safely back to the borders of Greece and provide them with markets to buy food along the way.
Sounds too good to be true.
It was. To seal this agreement, Tissaphernes invites the top 5 Greek generals, including their undisputed primary commander, Clearchus, to a peace conference inside his own tent. And here is the crucial mechanism of the tracker. Tissaphernes swears solemn oaths of safe conduct.
Ah, the oaths.
Yes. In the ancient world, an oath sworn before the gods was not just a legal contract. It was the absolute bedrock of cosmic trust. To break an oath was to invite the direct, terrifying wrath of the divine.
And that religious weight is exactly what makes the trap work. The Greeks literally could not conceive that a high-ranking noble would risk cosmic annihilation by breaking a sworn treaty in such a blatant way. So the Greek generals, believing the truce is genuine, walk into Tissaphernes' tent, accompanied by 20 captains who wait outside.
And then the trap is sprung.
The moment the 5 generals step inside the tent, a red flag is raised as a signal. The generals are instantly seized and bound. Simultaneously, hidden Persian cavalry sweep down and massacre the 20 Greek captains waiting outside, along with any Greek soldiers who just happen to be wandering nearby.
Just a total bloodbath.
Yeah. The 5 generals are sent in chains to King Artaxerxes and are eventually executed.
So the entire command structure is instantly vaporized. The men who knew the route, who possessed the diplomatic contacts, who held the disparate factions of the army together, gone. Just vanished in an afternoon. This is where the sheer terror of the situation fully sets in.
It really is the alien planet scenario.
It really is. The men are sitting in their camp, the sun goes down, and they realize they have no leaders, no guides, no food, and zero hope.
And if we connect this historical reality to the biblical theme of exile, you see something deeply profound here. Think of Adam and Eve driven from the absolute security of Eden, or, the Israelites dragged away in chains to Babylon.
Right.
Exile in the biblical imagination is never just a change of address. It is the radical, violent stripping away of all earthly security. The 10,000 are thrust into an environment where their accumulated wealth is suddenly worthless, their military contracts are void, and their political backing is dead. They're forced into a position where they must rely on something much deeper than their own localized power or earthly safety nets.
That is such a vital point for us to grasp.
Hmm.
When the safety net is completely obliterated, that is when the true nature of the human heart is exposed. It is incredibly easy to be a noble, disciplined, upstanding citizen when you're getting paid, when the supply lines are secure, and when society is functioning normally. But what happens when the bottom falls out? What happens to human morality when sheer survival is on the line? Xenophon explores this deeply, because he doesn't just write, the generals were killed, moving on. He hits the pause button on his entire narrative and gives us these incredibly detailed forensic psychological profiles of the men who were murdered.
Yeah, it's a masterclass in what the Greeks called ethopia, the art of character sketching.
Exactly. He examines their virtues, their vices, and their ultimate philosophies of life. And what he reveals provides a really fascinating parallel to the New Testament's diagnosis of the human condition.
He uses this moment of devastating crisis to expose the fatal flaws in these fallen leaders. Let's look at Clearchus first. He was a Spartan exile, roughly 50 years old, and the undisputed senior commander of the mercenaries. Xenophon tells us that Clearchus loved war the way another man might love money or, romantic pleasure. He would literally spend his own vast fortune just to keep fighting in various conflicts.
He is the ultimate military archetype. He is brave, he is tactically brilliant, and absolutely fearless in the face of the enemy. But Xenophon points out a glaring, fatal deficit in his character. Clearchus was utterly incapable of affection or empathy.
None at all.
None. He ruled entirely by fear. He was a product of the Spartan Agoge, that brutal military training system, and he internalized it completely. He was incredibly strict, dealt out unimaginably harsh physical punishments, and literally stated his belief that a soldier should fear his own commander more than he fears the enemy.
And Xenophon astutely notes the psychological consequence of that leadership style. He says that while the men respected Clearchus immensely during a crisis, because his face was so severe and his tactical mind was so sharp, the moment the immediate danger passed, the men would leave him if they could. They served him out of terror, not love. Yeah, there's actually a revealing incident from earlier in the march, when the army was at the city of Tarsus. The men began to suspect they were being led against the king, and they started to mutiny. They even pelted Clearchus with stones when he tried to force them forward.
So how does this hardened Spartan handle a mutiny?
He doesn't assert moral authority. He stands in front of his rebellious men and just weeps silently for a long time. It shocks them into silence. Then he manipulates them into following him by pretending he is going to resign and comfort with them. It's effective crowd control, but it is entirely cynical manipulation.
That's wild. And then you have Proxenus, who is a fascinating contrast. Proxenus was actually Xenophon's personal friend from back home. He's the one who invited Xenophon on this expedition in the first place. If Clearchus is the brutal tyrant, Proxenus is basically the nice guy who finishes last.
Very much so. Proxenus was a young, wealthy aristocrat. He had studied under Gorgias, one of the most famous sophists of the day. He was highly educated, and he genuinely wanted to do great deeds and be honored for them. But Xenophon diagnoses his fatal flaw right away. Proxenus was simply too gentle.
Too gentle for a mercenary army.
Way too gentle. He believed he could lead his men simply by praising those who did good and withholding praise from those who did bad. He completely lacked the capacity to strike fear into men who were wicked. Xenophon notes that Proxenus felt more afraid of being disliked by his soldiers than his soldiers felt afraid of disobeying him.
Which is a terrible dynamic for a leader.
Right. He could command men who were already naturally virtuous, but in a chaotic, desperate mercenary army filled with rough characters, he was easily taken advantage of and mocked.
He had all the education in the world, but he lacked the moral force to confront actual evil. And then, oh boy, we get to Menon. If Proxenus is the nice guy, Menon is the absolute embodiment of dark triad personality traits. He is a textbook sociopath operating in antiquity.
Menon is arguably one of the most chilling characters documented in ancient literature. Xenophon paints a portrait of pure, unadulterated moral corruption. Menon possessed a boundless, insatiable appetite for wealth and power, and he fundamentally believed that the fastest, most efficient way to acquire them was through perjury, lying, and deceit.
Just totally ruthless.
Worse than that, Xenophon explicitly states that Menon actually considered honesty, truthfulness, and piety to be forms of profound stupidity. He prided himself on his ability to deceive his own friends because, as his twisted logic reasoned, it is much easier to steal from someone who trusts you when their guard is down.
It is Machiavellianism centuries before Machiavelli was even born. He saw human virtue not as a goal, but as a weakness to be exploited. He cultivated relationships with the worst kinds of people because he felt that sharing in their crimes made them fiercely loyal to him.
And Xenophon makes a really pointed effort to tell us exactly how Menon met his end. While the other four generals were simply beheaded by the Persians, which was considered a quick, relatively honorable death in the ancient world, Menon was kept alive by the king for a full year.
Wow.
Yeah, suffering unimaginable torture and disgrace before dying the death of a common felon.
Now, this raises a crucial theological question that we need to examine closely. Are these just ancient military archetypes that Xenophon is using to make a literary point? Or is he documenting something much more profound about human nature itself?
Right, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Is Xenophon just giving us these extreme stock characters, the brute, the soft intellectual, the sociopath, just to make his own subsequent leadership look perfectly balanced and heroic by comparison? Or is he actually showing us the inevitable collapse of the human mind when it is separated from divine grace?
Well, from a biblical perspective, the text is crying out with the latter. You have to remember that Xenophon was a devoted student of Socrates. The Socratic ideal fundamentally believed that virtue could be taught. They believed that ignorance was the root of all evil, and that if you simply educate a man properly, he will inevitably choose the good.
But Xenophon's own historical account betrays the failure of that optimism, doesn't it?
Exactly. When you look at Menon, you don't see a man who is just poorly educated. You see a living, breathing embodiment of the Apostle Paul's devastating description of the corrupted human heart in Romans chapter 1.
That parallel is staggering. Paul talks about people who, having rejected the truth of God, are handed over by God to a depraved mind. He says they become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice.
And look at Romans 1.30. Paul literally says they invent ways of doing evil. That is Menon's entire philosophy of life right there. He invented new ways to betray his friends for profit. And the Bible is relentlessly clear about the root of this. Jeremiah 17.9 diagnoses the baseline human condition. The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?
So Xenophon, despite his Socratic optimism that education could fix humanity, is basically forced by the brutal reality of the expedition to document this deep, incurable darkness.
Right. Proxenus had the best, most expensive philosophical education money could buy, and his heart was too weak to lead. Clearchus had the ultimate disciplinary training of the Spartan state, and his heart was brutally tyrannical. Menon was just pure, unvarnished corruption. The crisis of the assassination strips away the polite veneer of Greek civilization, and what is left behind is a deeply flawed, fallen human nature that is entirely incapable of saving itself.
Which leaves these 10,000 stranded mercenaries in a terrifying vacuum. The deeply flawed leaders are dead, but so is the entire structural integrity of the army. The men are paralyzed by despair. They're literally just waiting to die.
Yeah, Xenophon describes the night after the generals were taken. The men can't eat, they refuse to light campfires, they can't sleep, they just lie on the ground with their weapons, thinking about their parents, their wives, and their children, knowing they will never see them again. Someone has to step into that void to keep this community from disintegrating into total anarchy.
And this is the turning point of the entire Anabasis. It is the moment everything pivots. Book 3 opens in the middle of this agonizing, pitch-black night, and the narrative lens zooms in closely on Xenophon himself. Now, it is crucial to remember Xenophon's status at this moment. He is not a general.
Right. He's basically nobody.
Exactly. He is not a captain. He isn't even an enlisted soldier. He describes himself as a private citizen. He just came along for the ride because his buddy Proxenus invited him to meet Cyrus. He has zero formal authority over these thousands of heavily armed veterans.
But in that darkness, amidst the weeping and the despair, Xenophon falls into a fitful sleep and experiences a profound, pivotal dream. The mechanics of ancient dream interpretation are so fascinating here. He dreams that a massive storm arises and a blinding bolt of lightning sent directly by Zeus strikes his father's house, setting the entire structure ablaze.
He wakes up absolutely terrified, because in the ancient Greek mindset, a dream like that was bursting with divine significance, but it was dangerously ambiguous. On one hand, a fire from Zeus striking his home could symbolize absolute destruction. He is trapped in the Persian king's territory, and his house is burning down.
But on the other hand,
The light came from a great god in the midst of impenetrable darkness, which could symbolize divine salvation, illumination, and deliverance from their current nightmare.
what I find so compelling is how this dream biologically and psychologically catalyzes him. He doesn't just sit there paralyzed, endlessly pondering the theological implications. The dream shocks him into action. He immediately gets up, walks through the darkened camp, and gathers the surviving officers of his dead friend Proxenus's division men, like Hieronymus the Elean. And there, in the middle of the night, he delivers a speech that completely shifts the psychological momentum of the entire army.
It is an absolute masterclass in crisis leadership and rhetoric. If you study the speech, you see Xenophon employing every tool in the Socratic toolkit. He doesn't stride in and arrogantly proclaim, "I am your new supreme commander, listen to me." That would have sparked a mutiny among proud Greeks.
Oh, instantly.
Right. Instead, he uses the psychology of questions. He asks them, why are we lying here? Are we waiting for the enemy to come? Do you honestly think the Persian king will show us mercy if we surrender?
By asking questions, he is forcing their brains out of the amygdala, the fear center, and into the prefrontal cortex. He forces them to logically articulate the terrifying reality of their situation, which paradoxically gives them a sense of control over it.
Exactly. He is employing the Socratic method in a literal war zone. He leads them to the inevitable conclusion rather than forcing it upon them. And then he appeals to their deepest shared values. He reminds them of the theological reality. The Persians have blatantly broken their solemn oaths to the gods. The Greeks, however, have maintained their piety.
Right.
Therefore, Xenophon argues, the gods must be against the Persians and for the Greeks. They have the moral high ground, and the gods will fight for them. Finally, notice his profound tactical humility. He tells these veteran officers, if you want to step up and lead, I will gladly follow your orders. But if you think I should lead, I will not use my youth or my lack of rank as an excuse to avoid the responsibility.
That's brilliant.
By feigning reluctance, by deferring to their authority, he ensures that they will instantly demand he take charge.
And it works flawlessly. They immediately elect him as their general. They then spend the rest of the night waking up all the other surviving officers across the entire camp. Right at dawn, they call a massive general assembly of all 10,000 soldiers. Xenophon steps up to address this terrifying ocean of grieving, panic-stricken men. And he does something so psychologically brilliant. He dresses himself in his absolute finest, gleaming ceremonial armor.
Such a great detail.
He literally reasons, if the gods grant us victory, fine clothes are fitting for the victors, and if I must die, I want to meet death looking my absolute best. Before he even utters a single syllable, he embodies hope and defiance visually.
And as he is delivering this rousing speech to the thousands of men, arguing that the gods will save them because of their piety and the Persians' perjury, an incredible, completely unscripted moment occurs. Right as Xenophon loudly proclaims the Greek word for safety or salvation, a random soldier deep in the ranks violently sneezes.
A sneeze. It sounds almost comical to a modern ear. You literally cannot make this up.
But you have to understand the mechanics of what they call tarmic augury. In the ancient Greek worldview, a sudden, unprompted sneeze was not just a biological reflex. The breath, the pneuma, was closely associated with the spirit. A sudden sneeze was considered a direct, involuntary omen from the gods, specifically from Zeus.
Wow.
The entire army, thousands of men, simultaneously recognized this omen. In a moment of collective religious awe, they spontaneously bow down in worship right there on the dusty plain. Xenophon, possessing incredible presence of mind, doesn't miss a beat. He pauses his speech and shouts, "Since at the very moment we were talking about safety, an omen from Zeus the Savior was revealed, I propose we vow to offer thank offerings to this god the moment we reach a friendly land."
There's incredible improvisational leadership.
He calls for a vote by a show of hands, and every single man raises his hand.
It's an electrifying cinematic moment. The crushing despair completely evaporates. The men stand up and sing a thundering battle hymn. In the span of a few hours, Xenophon has taken a disorganized, paralyzed mob and forged them back into a unified covenant community.
It's remarkable.
I look at this and I immediately think of the modern servant leadership principles that are so popular in the corporate world today.
Yeah.
Xenophon doesn't demand elite privileges. He demands the heaviest responsibility he shares in the hardship of the men. But if we're looking at this to deepen our faith, there is a massive, crucial difference between Xenophon's servant leadership and what we see in the New Testament, isn't there?
It is a vital distinction for your faith. You can learn immense practical leadership lessons from Xenophon, how to build consensus, how to be transparent, how to frame a crisis in terms of shared values. But as a Christian, you have to recognize the ultimate philosophical horizon of that leadership.
Right.
Xenophon's servant leadership is fundamentally a tactical tool. He serves the men, he motivates the men so that the men will fight effectively so that they can physically survive the march. He is leading them to save his own life just as much as theirs. It is mutually beneficial survival.
Contrast that with the leadership of Christ. In John 10:11, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." Christ's servant leadership is not a tactical maneuver to ensure mutual survival. It is an act of ultimate, unilateral self-sacrifice for the eternal redemption of his enemies.
Beautifully said.
Xenophon brilliantly leads his men out of the danger. Christ intentionally leads himself directly into the danger, absorbing the fatal blow of God's justice himself so that the sheep can go free. Human leadership, no matter how noble, brave, or effective, Xenophon's was brilliantly effective, ultimately points to our desperate need for a savior whose leadership transcends mere physical survival and accomplishes eternal resurrection.
That distinction changes everything about how you view leadership in your daily life.
It really does. So Xenophon has successfully galvanized the army. They make a radical decision. They burn their wagons. They burn their heavy tents. They strip down to the absolute bare essentials of survival, and they start marching north. They're heading straight into the terrifying unknown. And this brings us to the actual physical journey they face, which we can call their wilderness curriculum, because the geography and the elements they are about to face are brutal beyond words.
The geography alone becomes a terrifying enemy. They march north from the plains of Babylon, following the Tigris River, and they enter the towering mountains of the Carduchians, what is essentially modern-day Kurdistan. The Carduchians are fiercely independent mountain warriors who answer to no king, not even the Persian Emperor.
And the Greeks have to fight their way through.
For 7 agonizing days, the Greeks are forced to fight a relentless, grinding, three-dimensional war in steep ravines, narrow mountain passes, and dense forests. The Carduchians are rolling massive boulders down the cliffs onto the Greek formations. They are using enormous composite bows that fire arrows with such force they can punch straight through Greek bronze shields and breastplates.
That is terrifying.
Xenophon explicitly records that the mercenaries suffered more casualties and sheer terror in those 7 days in the mountains than in all their previous battles with the Persian king combined.
And that is just the beginning of the nightmare. Once they finally break through the Carduchian mountains, they hit the high elevation plateaus of Armenia, and they are slammed by the brutal reality of deep winter.
Oh, the snow.
We are talking about forced marches through 6 feet of snow. The mechanisms of human survival begin to break down. Men are going completely snowblind from the glare of the sun on the ice. They are losing toes and fingers to severe frostbite. Their baggage animals are freezing to death in the drifts. The psychological toll is just devastating. Soldiers, hardened veterans who survived Cunaxa, are literally just sitting down in the snow, refusing orders to move, choosing to wait to die of exposure rather than take another step.
And amidst this freezing starvation, they faced terrifying geographical bottlenecks. There's an incredibly tense sequence at the Centrites River, which borders Armenia. The river is deep, the current is freezing and fast, and the water comes up to their chests.
It's a total death trap.
It is. On the opposite bank, a massive force of Armenian and Chaldean cavalry is lined up, ready to slaughter them the moment they try to cross. And behind them, the Carduchians are gathering on the hills to attack their rear. They are perfectly mathematically boxed in.
It's the Red Sea moment all over again. They are completely trapped by water and enemies. And once again, Xenophon's subconscious processes the terror through a dream.
Yes. The night before the crossing, he dreams that he is tightly bound in heavy iron fetters. But suddenly the chains fall off his legs entirely of their own accord, and he's completely free to stride about. He wakes up filled with hope. At dawn, while he is eating breakfast, 2 young Greek soldiers come running up to him.
And what I love about Xenophon here is how utterly accessible he makes himself. He writes in the text that he gave standing orders that anyone, regardless of rank, could wake him up or interrupt his meals at any time if it pertained to the survival of the army.
True servant leadership in action.
Yeah. So these 2 young guys run up and say, "Hey, we were out gathering brushwood for a fire, and we saw an old man and some women hiding bags of clothes and some rocks across the river. We realized the enemy cavalry couldn't physically reach that specific spot because of the rocks. So we stripped down, waded in with our daggers, and crossed the river without the water even reaching our waists. We found a hidden ford."
Xenophon immediately pours a wine libation to the gods. He recognizes that the dream of the chains falling off has been fulfilled. They have found their escape route. He then designs a brilliant, complex tactical maneuver. He takes a portion of the army and fakes a crossing at the original deep spot, drawing the enemy cavalry away. This allows the vanguard, under the Spartan general Chrysippus, to cross safely at the hidden ford, while Xenophon stays behind with the rear guard to fight off the attacking Carduchians.
There's so much gritty camaraderie in this struggle. In the midst of all this terror, there's a fantastic moment of dark banter between Xenophon, the educated Athenian, and Chrysippus, the gruff Spartan.
I love this scene.
They're staring up at a heavily guarded mountain pass they absolutely need to take. They realize a frontal assault is suicide. They have to steal a march in the dead of night and take the high ground by stealth. And Xenophon jokingly says to Chrysippus, "Well, you Spartans are trained from boyhood in the agouge to steal your food, and you get whipped if you're caught. Here is a perfect opportunity for you to show off your excellent education and steal that mountain."
And Chrysippus shoots right back without missing a beat. "Well, I hear you Athenians are absolute experts at stealing the public funds, and your most successful politicians are the biggest thieves of all. Let's see you show off your education tonight."
It is brilliant. 2 men, freezing to death, surrounded by thousands of enemies who want to kill them, taking a moment to bust each other's chops about their hometown political stereotypes. But let's pull back and look at this entire wilderness experience through the theological lens. The physical and narrative parallels between this journey and the Israelites leaving Egypt are just striking.
They really are. You have a trapped community. You have a massive hostile wilderness that must be traversed. You have a reluctant leader who receives divine communication, Moses at the burning bush, Xenophon through his dreams. And you have a desperate journey toward a body of water that signifies ultimate salvation.
But wait, let me push back on this comparison for a moment. I hear the structural parallels. But you've argued earlier that the biblical wilderness humbles you. Look at the Greeks in the Armenian snow. They were freezing. They were starving. They were reduced to begging locals for scraps of food. They were physically humiliated by the elements. Doesn't that count as the kind of humility Moses talks about in the Exodus? Aren't they learning the same lesson?
That is a brilliant question, and answering it reveals the fundamental difference between physical humiliation and spiritual humility. You are right that the elements battered the Greeks. But look at what the wilderness produces in them. Think about what Moses tells the nation of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 8. He says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years? To humble you and to test you. He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." The biblical wilderness is meticulously designed by God to strip away the illusion of human self-reliance. It is meant to prove that your strength, your intellect, and your weapons cannot save you. Only God's miraculous provision can.
But the Greek wilderness experience does the exact opposite.
Precisely. The Greek wilderness does not produce spiritual reliance on God. It produces massive, justifiable pride in human virtue. The 10,000 survive precisely because they are incredibly tough. They survive because their bronze shield walls hold under fire. They survive because Xenophon is a legitimate tactical genius.
They power through it themselves.
Yes. They endure the frostbite through sheer gritted teeth willpower. When they emerge from the mountains, they don't say, "We were helpless and the gods carried us." They say, "We are the greatest warriors on earth." The Greek wilderness exalts human virtue and resilience. The biblical wilderness actively dismantles it to make room for grace.
Think about the most famous wilderness poetry in the Bible, Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The psalmist has a sovereign shepherd leading him, protecting him, and comforting him through the darkest valleys. Xenophon doesn't have a shepherd. Xenophon is forced to be his own shepherd. He has to wield the rod and staff himself, sometimes literally beating his men to keep them moving in the snow, to keep his community alive.
And this brings us to the core theological collision of the entire story. The stark difference in how these two communities survive, human grit versus divine miracle, leads directly to why they think they are surviving. This is where the ancient pagan worldview collides head-on with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Let's deeply examine the religious worldview of the Anabasis, because it would be a huge mistake to call Xenophon secular. He is a deeply, profoundly pious man. He halts the army constantly to perform animal sacrifices. He consults the seers and the entrails before making tactical decisions. He prays constantly, but his theology is entirely transactional. It is based on a ledger.
The academic Latin term for this ancient religious mindset is desuta de, which translates to, "I give so that you may give." Xenophon's theology is fundamentally a binding contract with the divine. To maintain the pax deorum, the peace of the gods, you must perform the exact right rituals, offer the right sacrifices, and meticulously keep your oaths.
Right.
Over and over again in his speeches to the panicked men, Xenophon repeats this formula. "We kept our oaths. The Persians broke their oaths. The gods must punish oath breakers to maintain cosmic justice. Therefore, the gods are obligated to be on our side."
It's like viewing God as a cosmic vending machine, or, adopting a strict karma mindset. The formula is simple. If I put enough good deeds, enough correct sacrifices, and enough kept promises into the machine, I get divine favor, protection, and physical survival out of it. And to be completely fair to Xenophon, in a human justice system, that logic makes perfect sense. The Persians were wildly treacherous. The Greeks were faithful to the original treaty. They objectively held the moral high ground.
They absolutely held the moral high ground in that specific political context. But the gospel represents a radical, earth-shattering subversion of that entire theological framework. Xenophon believes divine favor is earned by moral superiority and strict obedience. But look at the mechanism of salvation the Apostle Paul lays out in Romans 5:8. "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us."
While we were still sinners, not after we cleaned ourselves up.
Exactly. Not while we were bravely keeping our oaths, not while we were maintaining our fierce discipline in the freezing snow, while we were breaking every vow we ever made, while we were actively rebelling against him, essentially, while we were acting like Minan, Christ died for us. Jesus himself teaches this radical subversion of the transactional ledger in Matthew 5. He says that the Father in heaven causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
So think about how this applies to your own daily life and your faith. If you are evaluating your relationship with God through Xenophon's transactional lens, and let's be honest, so many Christians do this without even realizing it, you are constantly gripped by anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
You are constantly checking your spiritual credit score. Have I read my Bible enough today? Have I kept my promises to stop that particular sin? If I have a bad day and fail, is God going to instantly withdraw his protection from my family the way Zeus abandons the oath-breaking Persians? It is an exhausting way to live.
It is spiritually crushing. Xenophon's gods demand perfection, they reward the fiercely faithful, and they ruthlessly abandon the treacherous. But the God of the Bible doesn't wait for us to achieve flawless faithfulness before he acts on our behalf. Grace is not the reward for human faithfulness. Grace is God actively pursuing the very people who deserve to be abandoned in the snow.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
The 10,000 essentially earned their survival through blood, sweat, and tactical genius, but the Christian receives salvation and divine presence as a pure, utterly unmerited gift. If God operated purely on Xenophon's transactional terms of strict justice, not a single one of us would survive the wilderness of this fallen world.
That is a staggering realization that should completely free you from the anxiety of performance-based religion. The 10,000 are amazing, they are inspiring, but their underlying theology is ultimately a dead end for the human soul. Yet despite their deeply flawed theology, their sheer physical endurance leads to one of the most emotional cinematic climaxes in all of recorded history. It's a moment that profoundly echoes the Christian's ultimate hope for rest.
It is the defining moment of the Anabasis. The army has been marching, starving, freezing, and fighting a running battle for agonizing months. They have traversed thousands of miles of hostile territory. They are exhausted, their armor is battered, they are clothed in rags, and they are deeply traumatized. The vanguard of the army begins climbing the steep, wooded slopes of Mount Theshes.
And the tactical situation here is so intense. Xenophon is in the rear guard, right? He's at the back of the column.
Yes, Xenophon is at the very back, actively fighting off local mountain tribesmen who are harassing the rear of the column, trying to pick off stragglers. The column is stretched out over a long distance. Suddenly, Xenophon hears a massive roaring shout go up from the vanguard at the very top of the mountain. And the noise doesn't fade, it gets louder and louder, sweeping down the column as more ranks reach the summit and join the screaming.
So he thinks they're under attack.
Right. Xenophon assumes the worst. He thinks the front of the column has walked into a massive ambush and is being slaughtered. He leaps onto his horse, rallies the cavalry, and gallops desperately up the steep mountain path to rescue them.
But as he fights his way through the press of bodies and finally gets closer to the summit, he begins to make out the specific words the men are chanting over and over again through their tears.
Thalata, Thalata, the sea,
Yes.
sea.
Gives me chills just describing it. They push through the final tree line, reach the top of the mountain, and stretching out on the horizon below them was the shimmering blue water of the Black Sea. For an ancient Greek, the sea is not just a body of water. The sea is a highway. The sea means trade, means civilization, and most importantly, it means home.
The psychological dam breaks completely. Xenophon writes that these incredibly hardened soldiers, men who had slaughtered their way through the center of the Persian Empire, men who had frozen in the snows of Armenia, broke down in uncontrollable weeping. They fell to the ground, embracing one another, generals, captains, and lowly privates throwing their arms around each other, all weeping together.
It's so powerful.
And in a spontaneous act of profound relief and triumph, the soldiers gather heavy stones and build a massive cairn, a towering monument right there on the peak of the mountain. They pile up captured Persian wicker shields, raw ox hides, and their own broken weapons on top of it. It is a monument to their survival.
It is the ultimate catharsis. They actually made it. They beat the impossible odds. But to deepen our faith here, I want to pull up that Exodus comparison one more time. Think about the Israelites in Exodus chapters 14 and 15. The Israelites also reach the Red Sea, but their reaction and the mechanism of their deliverance is fundamentally opposite to the Greeks.
The contrast reveals the heart of the gospel. The Greeks weep for joy at a sea they had to fight, freeze, and bleed to reach entirely on their own human strength. Mount Theshes is a monument to the absolute triumph of human endurance. But Israel reaches the Red Sea and they're completely helpless. The Egyptian chariots are bearing down on them. They cannot fight. And God tells Moses to raise his staff, and the waters miraculously part.
Israel crosses on dry ground.
Yes, and then the waters crash down, destroying the Egyptian army without Israel lifting a single sword.
And what did the Israelites do on the other side? They don't just build a monument to their own toughness?
No, they sing. The Song of Moses in Exodus 15 is a magnificent hymn of pure praise to a Savior. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. Israel stands completely still and watches God do the impossible for them. The 10,000 do the impossible entirely by themselves.
But that raises a massive philosophical question about the human condition. Honestly, a bit of a depressing one. They survived. They made it to the sea. They built their monument. The movie ends. The credits roll. But what happens the next day? Did they just go back to their farms in Greece and live happily ever after?
Not at all. And this is the tragedy of the story. Once they reach the Greek colonies on the coast of the Black Sea, the intense, beautiful unity they forged in the fires of the wilderness immediately begins to fracture. Without the immediate threat of death holding them together, they fall right back into bickering, mutinies, and petty political infighting.
So human nature takes over again.
Completely. They struggle to find enough ships to transport them all. They end up taking cheap mercenary contracts in Thrace, fighting brutal skirmishes for a local warlord just to feed themselves. Eventually, the remnants of the army get absorbed into the Spartan military to fight the Persians all over again. They survived the wilderness, but they just went right back to being mercenaries. Their incredible wilderness experience did not change their fundamental human nature.
And this is exactly where Hebrews chapter 11 speaks so powerfully to the Christian life. The writer of Hebrews talks about the great heroes of the faith who lived as strangers and exiles on the earth. They were wandering, looking for a homeland. But the text says something crucial. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one.
That is the ultimate heartbreaking limitation of the 10,000s journey. They fought, they froze, and they bled for an earthly homecoming. And they got it. They saw the sea. But it didn't satisfy their souls. The biblical pattern of exile and homecoming points to something far greater, a city whose designer and builder is God himself.
Right.
Earthly survivals, escaping a tough job, surviving a financial crisis, these are temporary reliefs.
Yeah.
The high as Mount Etches always fades, but Christ provides the eternal homecoming. He is the true good shepherd who doesn't just guide us to the edge of the sea and leave us there, but brings us all the way into the Father's house, completely transforming us in the process.
What an incredible journey to trace. The Anabasis shows us the absolute, breathtaking pinnacle of what human beings can endure. It gives us this visceral, cinematic understanding of what it actually feels like to be exiled, to be betrayed, to be marching through a hostile wilderness. It shows us the brilliance of Socratic leadership and human courage.
It really does.
But more than anything, it creates this incredible silhouette. By showing us exactly what human virtue and grit can achieve, it highlights the Jesus-shaped whole of what they absolutely cannot achieve. Human effort cannot change the corrupted human heart, and it cannot earn the grace of God.
And that contrast leads us to a profound final thought. We've talked about Xenophon's reliance on Socratic philosophy, the belief that human wisdom and virtue can conquer any obstacle. Almost 400 years after Xenophon led his men to the sea, another man stood in Athens, the intellectual center of the Greek world, surrounded by the philosophical heirs of Socrates.
The Apostle Paul.
Yes. In Acts 17, the Apostle Paul stands at the Areopagus. He looks at the Greeks, who are still trying to reason their way to the divine, still building altars to unknown gods, still trying to secure their own salvation through intellect. And Paul introduces a completely alien concept, the resurrection of the dead through Jesus Christ.
Xenophon and his men achieved a stunning physical survival, but they eventually died. Paul was offering the Greeks in Athens an eternal resurrection that they could never earn, only receive. So the question for you today is this. When you are marching through your own wilderness seasons, those agonizing times of grief or career collapse or deep spiritual dryness, how are you approaching it? Are you just gritting your teeth, trying to be the ultimate Spartan, using your own sheer discipline to survive so you can just get back to the way things were? Or are you allowing the true Good Shepherd to use that terrifying wilderness to dismantle your self-reliance and transform your heart forever?
It is the difference between surviving a grueling ordeal only to return to the exact same broken life and allowing the grace of Christ to make you a completely new creation, fit for a heavenly country.
That changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you've enjoyed exploring this incredible ancient epic with us. More importantly, I hope it deepens your faith, inspires you to love Christ more, and encourages you to view your own daily trials not as a test of your willpower, but through the lens of radical, unearned grace. So the next time you feel like you're wandering in the dark, surrounded by threats, with no map to show you the way home, remember, you do not have to meticulously keep a ledger to earn the favor of the gods. You already have a Savior who willingly walked into the deepest darkness to bring you home. Until next time.